Welcome to the Your Most Interesting Story podcast. My name's Rob, and each episode I intend to serve you up a big old piece of real-life pie as we hear about and dig into the most interesting thing that's happened to someone in their life. These are first-hand, true stories told by everyday people. In the mid-1980s, our guest transitioned from struggling actor to illegal cannabis farmer. Join us as Jonathan tells us his most interesting story.
It was about 1984. I was your basic struggling, starving actor sitting on the front porch of my apartment in Pasadena, California with my roommate and his friend Scott, who had come down from up north. We were just sitting there and commiserating, getting drunk and smoking up a little bit. My roommate, Brandon, he turns to Scott and he says, "Hey, Scott, you need any help on the farm?" And I said, "Oh, you have a farm? What kind of cattle do you have?" And they both started laughing at me. They said, "No, I've got 80 acres of cannabis I grow in the Emerald Triangle."
The Emerald Triangle in Northern California is known for being the largest cannabis-producing region in the United States. It encompasses 3 counties that form an upside-down triangle: Humboldt, Mendocino, and Trinity counties. The name Emerald Triangle also reflects the region's lush green landscape.
He said, "Yeah, sure, I could use you. What are you doing for the next 3 months?" And I said, "Well, nothing really." So he said, "Well, I'll get you some good pay and get you some side benefits and come on up." So I packed up. I caught a Greyhound up to Eureka, California. And then I had to hitchhike. And I caught a ride on a logging truck because logging's real big there in Eureka. The logging truck gave me a ride all the way up to Mad River. Now, Mad River was population 34. It has gone through a massive growth spurt. Now it's a population 338. Okay. I met Scott in Mad River, and it's just a bar connected to a small convenience store. It's got a couple of gas pumps and a 15 by 15 standalone post office. And that's where all the growers on the ridge and the area would get their mail because they don't have an actual address. And I just had a great time right there at the old Mad River bar, thinking, oh, what an adventure I'm going on. Well, we hopped in Scott's four-wheel drive and went up 8 Mile Ridge to Scott's property. Now, that's about a 45-minute ride and 45 minutes away from the nearest electricity. And that ride, you need a four-wheel drive because it's bumpy. I got up there and he's showing me his land and I found a nice spot. It was beautiful. A nice spot for my tent in a beautiful grove of trees, and the wind was whistling through the leaves. What I imagined to be just a blissful night of glory in the wilderness. Then came the rain and the flash flood through my tent. I had inadvertently camped in a ravine.
Oh.
So, like a drowned rat, I go slopping over to Scott's trailer, and he let me sleep on the floor of his trailer that night. And he moved me into another little tiny trailer. It's a little bit bigger than the teardrop trailer. His former partner, I guess, had left it there. But just a door, a stove, a bed, a sink, and a toilet, and that's it.
I got to say that being 45 minutes away from electricity would make me nervous. Were you some sort of avid camper?
I mean, if he's setting up his tent in a ravine.
I was not the wilderness Willie, if you know what I mean. Oh, yeah, well, it's beautiful, the trees, and you're in California, and the mountains. Oh, what could go wrong? I didn't know what I was doing. That little trailer worked out really good. It was propane, so on the nights, I would light the stove and the burners, and that was my heat. And I just had to hope the propane tanks didn't blow up.
Ooh, that's not Smokey Bear approved.
Yeah, sounds a tiny bit sketchy.
Scott, he let me sleep on the floor of his trailer that night. And then I moved into the other little trailer the next day. And he brought me around to the neighboring growers on the ridge. Basically, it's for approval to make sure that I was okay to be up there by the neighbors. They gave me my mountain handle. Communication is done by CB. Scott, his handle was 57, like Heinz 57. And then there was a burly, long-haired, really massively bearded guy named Buffalo, and a crazy, scary guy called Mad Max. And then there was the lawgiver of the ridge, and that was Mike, and his title was the Judge. Since I was an actor, he decided my handle was going to be Hollywood. Now, all disputes or problems were brought to the judge for mountain justice.
Why was that? How did Mike gain that power or responsibility?
Good question. And this is in 84. Mike was probably in his 60s, and he was really an OG, an old grower. He'd been up there since the 60s. Picture a 60-year-old Jesus Christ with hair halfway down his chest and a beard just as long. He almost had this beautiful aura about him, but he also had a strong, mean side. His word was law in the mountain, and there was never any real problem. People would just bring it to the judge. He'd make an adjudication, and life went on.
What did you need to do to get your own nickname on the CB radio? What was the test?
Well, actually, how it happened was Scott, he vouched for me up on the hill. That's gold. If I give you my word, Jake, that this guy's good, it's good. It's done. And so that carried most of the weight. And he said, Scott trusts you, I trust you, and you're welcome. I was a little nervous. I'm sitting in this little trailer in front of 65-year-old Jesus Christ, judging.
You've passed the pearly gates at this point. You've been let in.
Yeah, I passed the green gates.
Do you have any stories of mountain justice that you're willing to share?
Well, yeah, there was this one guy who was caught trying to seduce another guy's daughter who was 14.
Oh, Lord.
Basically a little pedophile. And I can talk about this because Mike, rest his soul, he's passed. But he called the guy in and very calmly, from what I understand, I heard this secondhand, really calmly said, well, did you do this? And the guy, he admitted yes to Mike because I think he was afraid to lie to Mike. So he said, yeah. And he said, okay, well, as punishment, you're kicked off the hill. He was a partner with another grower. So he said, all of your partnership is forfeited. All of your rights to any of the weed is forfeited. And you need to get on your way now. And if you are seen on the ridge again, you won't be seen anywhere else. And no one ever saw him again. During the full moon, it's like daylight up there at night because there's no clouds. So I would be up all night with a rifle in hand, guarding the fields, because that harvest time, the fall, and October, and just getting into November, all the high school kids from down in Eureka and from down in Chico, they'll drive up and try to sneak up to the areas where they think the pot growers are. Because you've got plants up there, hold your arm out from your body, and from your shoulder to the bottom of your fist is one bud. And the plants would have 6 or 7 of those buds on them, of which each one was probably 1.5 pounds worth of bud.
Buds refer to the flowering tops of female cannabis plants. These aren't immature buds in the botanical sense, but rather mature flowers that haven't been pollinated. They contain the highest concentration of cannabinoids, particularly THC, which is the psychoactive compound responsible for the plant's effects. Buds are the most valuable part of the plant.
So there's a lot of money and a lot of risk, but these kids would get up there and they'd rip off one or two of those butt arms and never had to shoot anybody. I figured I'd shoot the gun in the air and scare some kids or something if I had to. Another problem is some of the people that are not part of your family on the ridge there itself, but that are growers nearby, they will actually come on over and try to steal some of your crops. So you got to watch out for those creeps. Luckily, I never came across any interlopers that I'd have to shoot. After a few weeks of tenderly loving the crops and watering and grooming and fertilizing them, all natural, of course, you've gone through the season of praying it's not too rainy. Next thing you know, it was time for harvest. After taking the branches of the buds from the plants, and then time for drying.
Hey, Jonathan, can I ask, why is rain a problem?
You got to be careful because too much rain and then the mold sets in and that can just ruin your crop and you're done. You're done.
But it wasn't just high school kids, neighboring interlopers, or mold that put the growers' crops at risk.
There's only one road in and out of the ridge. It's got a locked gate and a gatekeeper that lives in an old conversion van. And how that works out is each group have to supply someone for a week to guard in the van. If camp is the initials for the Campaign Against Marijuana Planting.
CAMP was a major initiative launched in the 1980s to combat illegal marijuana cultivation in California, particularly in the northern regions such as the Emerald Triangle. It was a multi-agency law enforcement task force aimed at eradicating illegal cannabis cultivation, focusing on outdoor grows.
These are the guys, and they're really bastards. They're the helicopters and SWAT teams. And you'd think that they're coming after the biggest terrorists in the world. What we basically do is, if you're in the van and they try to come up the ridge, well, you don't let them in and you're on the CB. So if they have to cut the lock and try to get in by the road, everyone else will have a chance to get into neutral federal territory. In other words, run down to the edge of Mad River, because a piece of land, I want to say it's like 25 yards up from the river itself, is federal land, and they can't touch you on that. So basically, you're here to helicopters, you run down the hill with your arms in the air and get down to the river. These guys, they were despicable. Not only did they just ruin people's lives, they would humiliate families and they would terrorize young kids. They would take their toothbrushes and wipe their behinds with them. Yeah. And they would do this right in front of the children. I mean, they treated the people worse than Abu Ghraib. I'm telling you. You can do the research and it'll show, the success of the Campaign Against Marijuana Planters. And you see the helicopters with the nets loaded with pot, and they're taking them off. Well, over in this town called Dinsmore, which was close to Mad River, there was an old lumber mill site, and it had a huge warehouse, and it had a huge incinerator. So what they would do is they'd say, okay, well, got all this weed, we're going to go burn it all in the incinerator. But the very, very interesting thing, the camp guys would unload all of those nets of pot and put them in the warehouse overnight. And then the next morning, they would burn all the pot. The only thing was that people started noticing that when they brought the plants out from the warehouse, none of the plants had any buds on. The rumor that would go around in Humboldt County that if you want great pot, check with the cops. Everyone's pretty much on the same timeline. And this is where it takes a village because everyone is burnt out and exhausted, needs to go to town for a little R&R, unwind. So when we would go or any of the neighbors would go, each of us would look out for the other's property, keeping an eye on the property, making sure nothing gets moldy and checking on the buds. Well, it was the weekend that Scott and I could get free. So we took a field trip to Eureka and we hit without a doubt, and I'm going on record here, the greatest dive bar in the known world. It's called the Vista Del Mar. Stop and picture this. It's on a wharf out in the water on pylons. And it's like a shack. Now, the first thing you notice when you open the door is the totally ungodly assault on your nose. I'm telling you, an open sewer would have been like a breath of fresh air to this place. And the place was packed. It's packed. Now, I'm sure you can imagine what the usual suspects would look like that frequent this place. It may be 2 full sets of teeth combined, and quite an assortment of what are lovingly known as the Humboldt honeys. And they were drawn towards Scott and me like moths to a flame because we were fresh meat. Burly wharf workers and lumbermen, they rounded out the crowd. But the funny thing about it is, once you got past the smell and the flat beer and the cheap whiskey, a good time was had by all. I mean, it was really a great night. Oh, and by the way, the nickname of the place, VD by the Sea. After going out for a nice steak dinner the next night, we just laid low and headed back up the mountain the next day. It was time to start getting busy manicuring the bud. And this is about a 12-hour day. Up at the crack of dawn, drink some Joe, and get snipping.
Manicuring refers to the process of trimming and shaping the harvested buds to remove excess leaves, stems, and other unwanted plant material. This step is done to improve the appearance, potency, and quality of the final product. Proper manicuring is crucial for maximizing the market value and quality of the cannabis.
Turned out I was a natural at grooming. Nice tight buds, a little bit of shake, but Scott let me keep the shake and the bits of trim, which I basically give away to my broke friends back in Pasadena.
Okay, keep those notebooks out because we have a few more terms to learn. Shake is the loose crumbs and trichomes left over from processing marijuana buds. It's generally lower in potency than the buds themselves. Trichomes are tiny hair-like outgrowths that produce cannabinoids. They often appear as frosty or sparkly coating on the buds and leaves. And lastly, trim refers to the small leaves and plant material removed during the manicuring process. And in case you're wondering how Jonathan's natural skill at manicuring worked to his benefit,
in manicuring, I made $125 a pound. On a good day, I might be able to trim up 2.5 to, on a really good day, 3 pounds of bud.
It's not bad in the 80s.
It's good money, good money. It's really good money. Mad Max, he was Judge's brother, which was weird because the judge was even keel, well suited to be the judge. But his brother Mad Max was insane. He was so far out there, he was on his way back. The next weekend, I remember the judge was going to go down to town with Mad Max. And he asked me to keep an eye on their place and watch for the judge's ex-girlfriend coming up to try and steal any weed. Now, she was a real nut job. This is how weird this woman was. She actually tried to hit on me right in front of the judge. I remember he laughed it off and told her, "Hey, you know where he sleeps, so go ahead." That's what the judge was like. You know, he just told her, "Oh, go ahead. You know, he's right over there in the trailer there." So Max His brother hands me his 45 and says, if she shows up and tries anything, shoot her, and she'll fertilize next year's crop. He just said that like I would say, oh, I like your new glasses. Just like that. Well, you know who showed up, of course. Higher than a kite, screaming that the judge owes her. I told her she had to leave and tried getting her into this old piece of shit pickup truck that was on the property, but then she grabbed the keys away from me. Well, we fought over the keys for a while, and I grabbed them back, and I tore her hand wide open, and it was just gushing blood, so I literally had to throw her in the truck and drive her down the hill to get some help. This is why I took a real risk, because I'm leaving the judges and Mac's property alone. I just said, this is what I got to do. So I made the 45-minute drive down the hill in about 25 minutes, risking life and limb. I got that woman down to town to a friend's trailer, told her, you probably better stay away. But she said she's going to get her due, and I don't really know whatever happened, but she was never seen again by anyone. I guess she might have just taken off. We finished the manicuring up just before Thanksgiving in time for the Bank of Korea to show up. The Bank of Korea, he's a Korean gentleman who works for the Mexican mafia, and he makes the arrangements to purchase the product before the season, and he'll give growers advances of cash to get them through till harvest. He shows up at the beginning of the season with 2 suitcases. One is filled with stacks of hundreds, like out of the movie, and the other is filled with drugs of every assortment. So people will barter and trade and exchange, and okay, for this amount of money, I'll get you this many pounds. And I think the going rate was about $2,400 a pound. Some people would trade off for coke, or some people had heroin habits and such. And then everything gets squared up at the end of the season when the Bank of Korea comes back. On top of the money I earned helping with the crop and manicuring, Scott gave me a bonus of a pound of bud. So it was like a $2,400 bonus on top of my pay and all of the bud trim that he just let me have. Well, I decided I could become quite wealthy if I traded the weed for cocaine. It was the 80s.
What's the exchange here?
An ounce of coke was $2,500. So it was pretty close, 24, 25.
So you traded a pound of weed for
an ounce of coke.
Okay.
But see, you got to remember, this coke that the Bank of Korea had,
it's cartel coke, like straight from the cartel.
Yes, it came from Colombia to LA to me.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody stepped on it. Nobody touched it. It was, right from Colombia.
Don't tell your mom or dad or your kids, but we're going to learn a little more drug terminology. With cocaine, stepping on or cutting refers to the practice of diluting the drug with other substances to increase its quantity and therefore profitability. Obviously, it also reduces its potency.
I figured I had nothing to lose if I make the Bank of Korea an offer. I said, what kind of deal could you make me? Now, at the beginning of the season, when I first met him, I told him a couple of jokes. I was the joker on the hill. And he thought I was crazy funny. I mean, this guy, he reacted like I was Don Rickles or something. I mean, he thought I was the funniest guy he'd ever seen. He said to me, tell me a good joke, and I'll trade you an ounce of pure Colombian untouched coke for your pound of weed. Well, I proceeded to tell him quite the filthy but hilarious joke, which afterwards I will share with you guys if you would like. He laughed so hard, he threw in a golf ball-sized rock of coke into that ounce. It would have had to be a quarter of an ounce itself as a bonus. Now, the real fun begins. We have to deliver 8 55-gallon drums loaded with bud to LA which is about a 10-hour drive. Oh, and also I have on me an ounce and a quarter of Coke. So if we get pulled over, it's the Gray Bar Hotel for about a century. And needless to say, for 10 hours, my ass was so clenched you couldn't stick a needle up it with an air hammer. I mean, it's a tense ride. We show up at the arranged location in East LA. We get to the address, like on cue from a movie or something. As soon as we pull up to the door, it magically just starts to open. And two huge guys, I mean huge, they come out with a dolly and proceed to offload our season's beautiful bounty and load it into the garage, close the garage door. We went off for a night of joyous celebration. Now, you'd probably wonder how my kingpin of Coke career turned out.
Yes, totally.
Well, like I say, it was pure, uncut Coke. I wanted to compare it with the average Coke on the streets of Pasadena. So I went out and bought a gram of Coke and had only my trusted friends come to my house. And I would have them do a taste of what was going in Pasadena and then a taste of mine and see how many times I could step on it before they couldn't tell the difference. And I was able to cut it 5 times before it matched, which worked out to about $22,800. But someone that I had trusted, and I never found out who though, showed up and kicked in my front door, covered with like a stocking mask, put a shotgun in my roommate's mouth and got all of the Coke, all of it.
Whoa. Honestly, the shotgun guy probably helped you out by getting you out the Coke game before you started. That's probably why you're alive telling us this story today.
Jake, you may be absolutely right, because I do stop and say to myself, how do I know I wouldn't be at the club the next night and sell to an undercover cop and I'd still be in jail now? I looked at it this way. I had a great adventure, got away with a huge load of drug smuggling, and I still had some bud shake for all my broke friends to get high, and that was just the first year on the mountain.
And that's going to bring this story to an end. Remember to check out the YMIS Podcast Instagram account for show-related pics. Your Most Interesting Story is available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. If you'd like to support the show, you can like, rate, review, share, and/or subscribe. Or you can visit our website, where you can also let us know if you'd like to tell us your most interesting story. Just follow the link in our show description. Our email address is ymispodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, be interesting.
I think I took a deep breath when we left, and then I exhaled when we got to LA.
Dude, yeah, you don't want to get in deep with the cartel and then end up missing in the mountains.
Took a big drag, leaned back, and then they're picking me up off the floor. I dropped like a bad habit.